Hi, friends, and welcome to our Read Aloud. I'm Mrs. Roos, and today we will be reading Enemy Pie, written by Derek Munson and pictures illustrated by Tara Callahan King. Now, before we begin, let's take a closer look at the cover of our book. Do you notice anything? Here we have pictures and written clues from our author. This will help us to figure out what will happen next. When we can take the clues from our book and rely on what we already know, we can come up with a guess about what we'll be learning about. This is called making predictions. Throughout this book, I want you to try to come up with your best predictions at what will happen next. Follow along in our strategy chart about places of evidence and make your predictions as we go. We'll come back to this later, but let's try together for now. Let's take a look at our picture first. This is a good clue place to start. Well, I can see a little boy behind a big pie, but this isn't a regular pie. Take a closer look. Well, I can see dirt and weeds and grass and rocks and little pebbles and even earthworms. That's so yucky. Let's take a look at our words. For my best enemy. This is making me think that our narrator has big intentions behind this pie. Can you start to guess at what they may be? Well, it's for his best enemy, and it's a yucky pie. I don't think this is for a friend. So I'm going to turn to my prediction chart and fill it in as we go. I predict that the pie is going to be awful, and that enemy will not like it. Why? Because I relied on my pictures, and I see all the gross ingredients in this pie. Now, let's begin. Let's see this picture. These two boys don't look like enemies. Let's keep reading and find out why this may come in handy later. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood, right next door to my best friend, Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party at his trampoline, and I wasn't even invited. But my best friend, Stanley, was. Jeremy Ross was the one and the only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood, but as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go in. Let's think of the word enemy. Have you ever been involved with someone that you didn't get along with? They're certainly not a friend if they laugh at you. It sounds like him and Jeremy have some big conflicts. Let's keep reading. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how, he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy pie, he said, satisfied. I wonder what's going to be in enemy pie. Based on what we've seen so far, can you predict what will be inside enemy pie? I think it's going to be full of all kinds of yucky, gross stuff. Let's find out. You may be wondering, what exactly is an enemy pie? I was wondering too, but Dad said the recipe was so secret he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kinds of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, and he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he needed those. I gave him the gum I had been chewing on all morning. He gave it right back to me. Let's see. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. As a good reader, I noticed that our narrator is confused when he's playing basketball alone. Confused means he's a little unsure of something. We've all been a little confused before, but he's confused because he doesn't understand why something would smell really good from the kitchen. So I'm predicting that enemy pie is now actually going to be good instead of bad. Let's keep reading to see if this prediction is true. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good, but Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked like plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. What do you think our narrator's job will be? What do you think will make the pie work? I wonder why the dad isn't sharing the recipe. I think he's starting to sense something that we don't know yet. He talked quietly. There is one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross, and then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on the door. As a good reader, I see our narrator in the picture has a scared look on his face. Can you tell? His lips look down, his eyes look sad. I think he's scared because he has to ask Jeremy to play. This makes me think that Jeremy may be the bully. He feels nervous to ask him, and he's very upset. I'm predicting that Jeremy is going to be mean and not want to play with our narrator because Jeremy has already laughed at him at a baseball game and left him out of his trampoline parties. Let's keep reading to find out if this prediction will be confirmed or will adjust later on. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. "Can you play?" I asked. He looked confused. "I'll go ask my mom," he said. He came back with shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. "You boys stay out of trouble," she said, smiling. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course, I couldn't tell Dad that since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have enough room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in, "Can we go in it?" he asked. I knew he was going to ask me that, but he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list. And enemies are not allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me how to throw a boomerang. And he did have me over for lunch. And he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. "Okay," I said, "but hold on." As a good reader, I noticed that our narrator tells Jeremy that he has to wait before going into the treehouse. I think he wants Jeremy to be his friend. So I predict that he will take down the enemy list that he has up in his treehouse so that way Jeremy doesn't see it. Let's keep reading. I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, and when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. It looks like the boys are having a lot of fun together. I can tell because it looks like they're smiling and being sneaky, hiding from the dad, wanting more time to play. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner. My favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut the pie into 8 thick slices. "Dad," I said, It sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Oh no. Do you think the dad is going to give the pie to Jeremy? Let's see. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, Jeremy said, looking at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. Jeremy, don't eat it. It's a bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something. Jeremy's fork stopped before touching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why was your dad already eaten half of it? I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all that was said. I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing, Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. It looks like they're really enjoying this pie, and it looks like our ingredients are extra tasty, and nothing bad happened to an enemy. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or if their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer because I just lost my best enemy. The end. So, do you think the pie worked? What did our narrator learn about friendship? I think he learned what it means for people to grow and change and how to work through conflict. It's not always easy being friends, but our little guy learned what it was that day.